I never thought I'd feel so invisible in a town like Willowbrook, Georgia. The streets were quiet, almost unnaturally so, like the world was holding its breath. I, Rebecca Lawson, 28, Deputy Sheriff, entered my first shift at the precinct with a knot in my stomach. My uniform felt heavier than usual, my badge colder against my chest. Mark had left the house this morning with his usual distant glance, and I realized, not for the first time, that I was alone even in a marriage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I walked the narrow corridors, each step echoing against walls that had seen more secrets than confessions. Block C was a new assignment, the one no one volunteered for, and it smelled of bleach, sweat, and despair. That's where I first saw him, Dante Rodriguez. He wasn't like the other inmates. There was a stillness about him, a kind of quiet intelligence that made the hair on my arms stand up. His eyes flicked toward me for only a moment, and I felt it, a chill crawling along my spine, a pull I didn't understand. He was polite, almost unnervingly calm. Yet there was a sharpness in his gaze, the kind that promised danger if crossed. I told myself it was just curiosity, a fleeting thought. But as I watched him, something inside me, long buried beneath the monotony of law enforcement and loneliness, stirred awake. It happened the next morning, in a moment so small it could have been nothing, if I hadn't felt it. I walked past the small exercise yard in Block C, the metal bars casting long, skeletal shadows across the cracked concrete. He was there, leaning against the wall with that same unnerving calm, as if he owned not just the space, but the very air around him. Our eyes met again, and this time it lasted longer. Just a heartbeat, but enough to make the world tilt. Dante's smile was faint, almost teasing, like he knew a secret I hadn't yet discovered. The guards moved around him, oblivious, while he watched me as if measuring my weight, my intent. I told myself it was wrong, dangerous even, but my chest tightened in a way that wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, yet I lingered, feeling the pull of something I couldn't name. Later, in the quiet of my office, I found myself sketching him in my mind, replaying the brief interaction over and over. How could a glance, mere seconds, leave me trembling, alert, aware of every sound and shadow around me? Something about him was magnetic, a force that didn't belong in a place like this. And I realized, with a cold shiver, that whatever this was, it had just begun, and it would not stop. The first real conversation happened in the library, a dim, cramped room that smelled of old paper and disinfectant. I had never been assigned to monitor inmates here, but Dante was sitting at a table alone, a well-worn copy of Love in the Time of Cholera open before him. Something about the way he turned the pages, slow, deliberate, made me pause at the doorway. "Do you like Marquez?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice wavered. He looked up, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of us. "I do," he said softly, the sound carrying an odd weight, as if he had been waiting for someone to ask. Our conversation began cautiously, about literature, symbolism, and love's persistence. But it didn't stay cautious for long. We drifted into confessions, our regrets, our quiet fears, the loneliness that clawed at our bones. Each word he spoke wrapped around me, tightening, suffocating in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. By the end of the hour, I realized I had lingered far longer than permitted. My chest was heavy, my thoughts tangled, but I couldn't shake the pull of him. There was an electricity here, a dangerous connection that crossed invisible lines, stretching across bars and regulations. For the first time in years, I felt seen, and I knew, with a chill that ran along my spine, that this was only the beginning of something I could neither control nor resist. The nights became my sanctuary, and Dante became my obsession. I found myself lingering in the empty corridors after my shift, listening to the distant hum of fluorescent lights, waiting for the moments I could talk to him again. What began as literature discussions slowly bled into confessions I had never shared with anyone. Fears, regrets, sleepless nights haunted by shadows of the past. And he shared too, in low, measured tones, tales of a life scarred by mistakes and desperation. I remember one night in particular, when the prison was quiet enough to hear our whispers echo against the concrete walls. He spoke of dreams he'd buried under the weight of confinement, and I felt the weight in my own chest, the hollow ache of a life half-lived, of love given to someone who had already left me. Every word between us was a thread, fragile yet binding, pulling us closer across the impossible divide of steel bars and rules I was sworn to uphold. By the time I returned home, the corridors of my own house felt stifling, the shadows on the walls accusing me. I was crossing lines I could never return from, yet I couldn't stop. I didn't want to. In his presence, I was visible, real, unmasked, and the more I gave, the more I realized that something dangerous, irresistible, and terrifyingly intimate was growing between us. The call came late, trembling through my phone like a warning I couldn't ignore. Dante had been set upon in the yard, beaten senseless by a group of inmates who thrived on cruelty. When I arrived, the scene was worse than I had imagined. Blood smeared across his shirt, lips split, eyes swollen, yet defiantly burning. Something inside me snapped. The rules, the protocols, all the careful lines I'd drawn around myself disappeared in that instant. I knelt beside him, my gloved hands shaking, trying to staunch the bleeding, my heart hammering so loudly I feared he could hear it over his labored breathing. He didn't plead or cry, he just stared at me, a flicker of gratitude, or was it warning, in his gaze. I felt it then, the undeniable pull, the dangerous tether that bound me to him. My concern wasn't just professional, it was primal, irrational, and utterly consuming. That night, as I drove home through deserted streets, the memory of his bloodied face haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the vulnerability that had been thrust before me, and the suffocating desire to protect him at any cost. The line between duty and obsession blurred, and I realized, with a chill that crawled down my spine, that there was no turning back. Something dark had awakened, and it thrived in the shadows between us. That night, sleep eluded me. His bruised face haunted every corner of my mind, and an idea took root. Dangerous, illicit, irresistible. I couldn't stop thinking about him alone in that cell, vulnerable, while I walked free. By morning, the plan had solidified. A small, contraband phone. It was simple, almost laughably so, but it would create a bridge between us, a secret world that no bars or guards could touch. I smuggled it carefully, hiding it in a jacket pocket during my rounds, my hands trembling as I placed it where only he could find it. The thrill of the act sent a shiver down my spine, a mixture of fear and anticipation that I had not felt in years. That night, at exactly 2 a.m., his voice came through, low and cautious. It was surreal, speaking to him across invisible lines. No one to watch, no one to judge. We whispered of books, of nightmares, of stolen dreams that now felt tangible. Every night, between 2 and 4. Our secret universe expanded. Words became confessions. Confessions became trust, and trust became an obsession that tightened like a noose. I knew it was wrong, criminal even, but it felt alive in a way nothing else had. For the first time in years, I was seen, and I could see him. And the more I did, the more I understood that this was only the beginning. Every whispered word, every stolen moment, was drawing us deeper into something I might never escape. I found out I was pregnant in the quiet hours of a Sunday morning, the sunlight slipping through the blinds like a judgment I couldn't escape. At first, disbelief knotted my stomach. Mark's child, his distant, hollow presence in my life, growing inside me. I sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the line of my abdomen, feeling an emptiness that matched the void in my marriage. The news should have been joy, but instead it felt like a weight, a chain tethering me to a life I no longer wanted. Yet the timing felt cruelly ironic. Dante's voice still lingered in my ears, low and intimate from our nightly conversations. I imagined him, bruised but alive, and a dangerous thought whispered in my mind. Freedom, love, and something forbidden might all collide. My pregnancy became another secret, a hidden truth I carried alone, alongside the even darker secret of our nightly connection. Each heartbeat I felt was mirrored by the pulse of my obsession with him. I tried to focus on my work, patrolling streets that felt empty and hostile. But every patrol, every corridor, every fluorescent flicker reminded me that my life was no longer entirely mine. The child was invisible, the desire I felt for Dante undeniable, and the lines I had always followed now blurred into shadow. Something had shifted irreversibly. I was no longer just Rebecca Lawson. Deputy. I was a woman caught between duty, loss, and a dangerous, consuming desire that thrummed in the dark. It happened faster than I could brace for it. One moment, I was walking through the dimly lit corridors of Block C, checking on inmates. The next, pain exploded inside me like fire wrapped in ice. My vision blurred, and the world tilted into chaos. I collapsed against the cold tile floor, my hands pressed against my stomach, feeling something inside me rupture and vanish. The child I had hidden from the world, that fragile tether to my past life, was gone. The echo of my own cries bounced off the sterile walls, mingling with the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of other deputies making their rounds. No one could see the full weight of my loss. My grief was private, intimate, and absolute. Dante's face, bruised but alive, flashed in my mind. He had no idea, couldn't know, and yet his absence made the emptiness worse. The miscarriage shattered more than just my body. It shattered the last remnants of the life I had once clung to. When I returned home that night, my bed felt like a coffin. Sleep refused me, my mind replaying the loss over and over, interwoven with the danger, thrill, and guilt of my connection to Dante. Something inside me had died, and something else, darker, fiercer, and untamable, was awakened. The line between right and wrong, love and obsession, blurred completely. I knew then, in the hollow ache of my body and the burning ache of my heart, that there was no going back. The miscarriage left a void I could no longer ignore, a hollow echo that consumed everything familiar. I walked the precinct halls with a new sense of detachment, my badge heavy, my uniform suffocating. Every sound, every shadow, reminded me of what I had lost and of what I longed for. Dante, his voice, low and urgent, haunted me through the nights. stirring something I could neither name nor resist. The lines I had sworn to uphold, between duty and desire, law and obsession, blurred completely. By the time I sat alone in my dim apartment, the decision crystallized with a terrifying clarity. I would help him escape, not for revenge, not for thrill alone, but because the life I had known, mundane, empty, trapped beneath fluorescent lights and hollow vows, was over. The miscarriage had burned the last thread tying me to it. I felt a cold exhilaration, a dangerous kind of freedom, coursing through my veins. The thought of breaking every rule, of defying the system I had sworn to protect, no longer frightened me. It exhilarated me. I began to plan with obsessive precision. Every detail burned into my mind. Guard rotations, camera blind spots, even Dante's daily routines. In the quiet of my apartment, I sketched maps, memorized patterns, imagined the feel of his hand in mine as we slipped past alarms. The choice was terrifying, irrevocable, and intoxicating. I was no longer just Rebecca Lawson. Deputy. I was a woman who had lost everything safe and was reaching for something forbidden, irresistible, and utterly consuming. I became a shadow in the prison, moving through the corridors with a precision I had never known before. Every guard rotation, every camera angle, every blind spot in Block C was etched into my mind. I watched them like a predator studying prey, noting their habits, their pauses, the way they chatted mindlessly as though the world belonged only to them. Dante's cell became a fixed point in my calculations, a center around which every plan revolved. At night, I traced their movements on scraps of paper, sketching routes, imagining escape paths as though rehearsing in a private theater of shadows. Each observation tightened the noose of anticipation and fear around me. The adrenaline surged with every detail I memorized, the way the night shift's lights flickered, the moments the cameras panned away, the gaps in the security checks. Every second of inattention became a potential lifeline for us. I could feel the thrill coiling in my chest like a living thing, dark and demanding. The more I observed, the more I realized how fragile the system was, how vulnerable Dante and I were together. But the danger only made it sweeter, sharper, more irresistible. Each step of planning, each quiet note jotted in the margins of my mind, drew me deeper into a world I could never leave. By the end of the week, I knew the escape wasn't just possible, it was inevitable, and the thought sent a shiver down my spine that I welcomed like an old, dangerous friend. Falsifying Dante's medical records was the first true test of how far I was willing to go. I spent nights hunched over a dim desk, scanning forms and adjusting dates, crafting a history that would shift him from Block C to the medical wing. Each keystroke, each carefully placed note, felt like a thread pulling me deeper into a web I could never escape. The adrenaline was constant, a low hum beneath my skin that made every heartbeat feel like a warning. I convinced myself it was just paperwork, a minor manipulation in a sea of regulations, but every forged signature, every doctored entry, carried a weight that made my hands shake. If caught, I would lose everything, my career, my freedom, even the fragile grasp on my sanity. Yet as I worked, I imagined Dante reading the notes, imagining the small victory that would place him within reach. The idea of seeing him safe, if only temporarily, sent a shiver down my spine that was both thrilling and terrifying. By the third night, the plan had taken on a life of its own. I no longer merely watched, I orchestrated. The records were more than forms. They were keys, gateways, promises of escape. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in as I reviewed each detail, the hum of the city outside fading until it was just me, the forms, and the invisible threads binding Dante's fate to my own. When I finally leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated, I knew the hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was the knowledge that I was already in too deep to ever turn back. November 19th arrived like a storm I had been waiting for. Every step I took that night felt heavier than the last, my pulse hammering in sync with the faint ticking of the security clocks. I moved through the shadows of the empty corridors, hands steady but heart racing, carrying the lock-picking tools I had hidden for weeks. Each lock I touched seemed to pulse beneath my fingers, as if aware of the transgression about to unfold. Dante's cell loomed ahead, silent, suffused with the dim green glow of the nightlights. I worked quickly, carefully, listening to the distant hum of alarms and the shuffle of the night guards. When the final click of the lock echoed in the stillness, a thrill so sharp it burned shot through me. He looked up at me with web, expectant eyes, and for a heartbeat. The world shrank to just the two of us. We moved through the prison like ghosts, slipping past cameras and shadows until we reached the transport vehicle I had prepared. The engine growled beneath us, a reminder that freedom was dangerous, finite, and immediate. Every mile away from the facility heightened the fear and the exhilaration, the thrill and the terror mingling until they were indistinguishable. That night, we were fugitives and conspirators, bound by something that went beyond love or obsession, a shared descent into darkness from which there was no return. The highways stretched before us like endless veins of asphalt, carrying us through Tennessee, then Texas. Each mile a pulse of fear and exhilaration. The world outside the car felt distant, surreal, billboards blurred, streetlights smeared into streaks of amber and white, and every rearview mirror became a potential threat. We moved fast, always changing vehicles, changing towns, our identities as fluid as the night itself. Each motel room was a temporary refuge, a cage we willingly stepped into, hearts pounding in the quiet. We whispered to each other constantly, words barely above breath, sharing the map of our escape, the details of every patrol, every check we had memorized. Even in the darkness, I could feel Dante's gaze on me, sharp and alive, and it sent a thrill down my spine that mingled with terror. The danger was intoxicating, the risk undeniable, and the knowledge that capture could come at any moment made every stolen moment feel infinite. Sleep was nearly impossible. Paranoia became our constant companion. Every shadow outside the curtained windows, every stranger's glance in a gas station, every unfamiliar noise in the motel corridor was amplified. Yet, beneath the fear, a strange intimacy thrived. We had left the world behind, yet we were tethered to each other, bound in a quiet, obsessive symbiosis. With every mile, every turn, the distance from our old lives grew, and the gravity of what we had done settled like ice in my chest. There was no turning back. Las Vegas greeted us with its neon glare and relentless noise, a city alive with distractions, yet deaf to the terror lurking in its shadows. We moved through its streets like ghosts, slipping between motels and back alleys, our faces hidden behind hats and sunglasses, our identities as fragile as the paper we had used to forge them. The strip shimmered with false promises, a glittering mask over the dangers that always waited outside our door. Each motel room became a temporary sanctuary, walls closing in with the weight of paranoia, every clatter from the next room, every knock at the door, made our hearts leap. We whispered constantly, planning each move, memorizing escape routes, and rehearsing what we would do if someone discovered us. The fear was a constant hum, a thread running through every conversation, every glance, every touch. Yet, in that fear, our bond deepened, raw and unshakable, a tether to sanity in a world that had become hostile and surreal. I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted, even amidst the city's chaos. Security cameras, police sirens, strangers' stares, they all felt like threats aimed directly at us. And yet, despite the suffocating tension, we clung to the thrill of freedom, the dangerous intimacy of shared survival. Every moment was heightened, every heartbeat amplified, and in that relentless pressure, a strange beauty emerged. We were fugitives, lovers, conspirators, suspended between danger and desire, caught in a world that would not forgive us if we faltered. By the third week in Las Vegas, paranoia had woven itself into every fiber of our existence. Every passerby felt like a threat, every police siren a warning, every camera lens a pair of eyes scrutinizing us. Sleep was fractured, every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the window made us startle. Hearts hammering in unison. Our motels were never more than temporary havens, each night spent anticipating the knock that might end everything. Even our love, which had once felt like salvation, became entwined with fear. Every touch, every glance carried an undercurrent of urgency, a silent acknowledgement that freedom was fragile and could vanish in a heartbeat. We spoke in whispers, in coded phrases, rehearsing escape routes, memorizing alleyways, and planning contingencies as if life itself depended on it. Because it did. The city's glittering lights seemed cruelly ironic, a celebration of life outside our reach while we remained trapped in tension and shadows. I caught myself studying strangers too long, imagining them as threats, imagining them following us. Dante did the same, his sharp gaze scanning constantly, reflecting my own dread. It was exhausting, intoxicating, suffocating, and strangely thrilling. Every second was heightened, every heartbeat amplified. The paranoia that once felt like a curse became our compass, guiding us through a city that could betray us at any moment. By then, it was clear, freedom was never safe, only temporary, and every step we took was a gamble with death lurking just beyond the neon glow. The moment the FBI broadcast our faces nationwide, the world became a predator, and we were its prey. My reflection in the motel mirror was no longer my own. It was a wanted criminal, a fugitive, a woman whose life had unraveled into headlines and alert bulletins. Armed and dangerous, the words echoed in my mind like a mantra, each repetition tightening the coil of fear in my chest. Every stranger's glance became a threat, every passing car a potential trap. Dante and I moved with even more caution, slipping between cities, changing vehicles, shaving hours off travel time, and erasing every trace of our identities. Our love, fierce and desperate, became our lifeline. Yet the constant vigilance eroded sleep, sanity, and even simple moments of intimacy. The world outside was now hostile, its gaze sharp and unforgiving. Yet inside the car, or the dim motel rooms, our whispered confessions and shared strategies made the terror almost bearable. I kept replaying the broadcast in my mind, my face on every screen, my name, my crime spelled out for all to see. The city lights no longer promised anonymity. They mocked me with their normalcy. Paranoia had evolved into a living entity, stalking us, feeding on every misstep, every hesitation, and through it all, Dante's hand in mine was the only anchor I had, the only certainty that in a world hunting us relentlessly, we were still together, fugitives, conspirators, and dangerously in love. The days blurred into a ceaseless rhythm of motion. Every morning, we were in a new city. Every night, in a different motel. Constantly erasing and reconstructing our identities. Our suitcases were packed with essentials, disguises, and scraps of false documentation. Each item a lifeline. Each detail a potential shield against capture. The world had become a maze, and we were ghosts moving through it, unseen but hunted. Sleep was always fleeting, fragmented by imagined footsteps, the sudden roar of engines outside, or a shadow that lingered too long in the corner of the room. We spoke in whispers, sharing observations and plotting contingencies, the hum of paranoia as constant as the pulse in our veins. Every minor slip, a license plate misread, or a motel clerk too curious, became a dagger poised over our freedom. And yet, in that relentless motion, a strange intimacy flourished. Our survival depended entirely on each other, a precarious tether that made every touch electric, every glance loaded with unspoken understanding. By the end of each day, exhaustion settled over us like a thick fog, but the fear never fully dissipated. We were constantly alert, constantly moving, yet always aware that one misstep could end everything. The world outside was unforgiving, indifferent, and infinitely dangerous. But together, we felt a fleeting, terrifying sense of power. The chase had become our reality, and we were trapped in it willingly, bound by love, obsession, and the inescapable thrill of survival. Even love became a battlefield. Every whispered word, every touch, carried the weight of survival and suspicion. Paranoia had seeped into our intimacy. A moment of distraction could mean capture. A lapse in judgment could end everything. I found myself watching Dante as much as I watched the streets, noting every hesitation, every flicker of emotion, questioning whether he might falter under the relentless pressure. And I knew he did the same with me, scanning, analyzing, trusting cautiously, like two predators circling one another in a confined space. Arguments flared in whispered tones, born from exhaustion and fear rather than anger. A wrong word, a misread expression, a suggestion of a risk too great, all could ignite tension that simmered long into the night. Yet even in that tension, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. We depended on each other completely, our fates bound by the choices we made, the roads we traveled, and the lies we told. Every day was a high-stakes negotiation between trust and danger. And the balance was fragile. One misstep, one moment of doubt, could unravel us. And yet, in that precarious space, our connection deepened, raw and unbreakable. Love had become inseparable from fear, obsession, and survival, a dangerous fusion that kept us alive, together, and acutely aware that the world outside was hunting us, relentless and merciless. We thought we were invisible, ghosts in the quiet streets of a small Utah town, but the illusion shattered in a single, terrifying moment. I wandered into the grocery store, blending in, or so I thought, searching for essentials under the fluorescent glare that felt harsher than any spotlight. And then I felt it, a gaze that pinned me in place, the unsettling weight of recognition. A retired FBI agent had noticed my walk, my posture, the careful, precise way I moved, honed by years of law enforcement. Panic rippled through me, cold and sharp, and I froze mid-aisle. Dante's hand found mine, squeezing with silent urgency. But the knowledge that we were compromised spread like ice through my veins. The mundane grocery store became a trap. The ordinary shelves and aisles transformed into a stage for our imminent capture. Every step, every breath, was a gamble, and I knew our freedom had just been pierced by fate's cruel hand. We tried to remain calm, to act casual, but the tension was palpable, a living thing wrapping around our chests. The agent's gaze never wavered, precise and relentless, as if he could read our very thoughts. My heart pounded, adrenaline flooding every nerve, and I realized that despite every careful plan, every mile traveled, every false identity, the world had caught up. The life we had built in shadows and whispers was unraveling, and there was nowhere left to hide. Within minutes, the quiet town erupted into a controlled chaos. I could not escape. Tactical teams appeared almost out of nowhere, surrounding the grocery store with precision that made my chest tighten. Rifles gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, faces masked, movements choreographed with deadly efficiency. Every exit was blocked, every option evaporated, and the air itself seemed to pulse with the inevitability of our capture. Dante and I exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the end of our fugitive existence. My hands were trembling, heart hammering. Yet a cold, almost surreal clarity settled over me. There was no dramatic fight, no cinematic escape, only the stark, oppressive presence of authority that made it impossible to breathe freely. Each step we took was guided by their commands, our freedom stripped with terrifying swiftness. I felt the weight of years spent running, all the meticulous planning, every calculated risk, dissolve in the span of seconds. Yet even as we were cuffed and led out, a strange calm settled between us. Dante's hand brushed mine briefly, a quiet promise, a tether in the midst of surrender. Despite the humiliation and fear, I realized something profound. In this moment of ultimate defeat, our bond remained unbroken. They could take our freedom, but not what we had built in the shadows, the whispers, and the stolen nights of our love. The courtroom was suffocating, filled with the weight of judgment, the eyes of strangers, and the echo of our choices. Dante refused every plea deal, standing resolute as the prosecution outlined our crimes, the escape, and the chaos we had sown. His gaze found mine across the room, unwavering, and in that moment, the world outside disappeared. He spoke not of self-preservation, but of devotion, of a love that had grown through fear, danger, and desperation, a love that no prison walls could contain. Every word he uttered carried a dangerous intimacy, a confession that made the air tremble. I felt the full magnitude of our decisions, the consequences looming like storm clouds. Yet his defiance lit a spark of resilience within me. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone in facing the consequences. He was standing beside me, a mirror to my own obsession and devotion. The gavel struck, but it felt distant, almost irrelevant, compared to the truth unfolding between us. Even as the sentences were handed down, Dante's extended by the escape. Mine set at 15 years, the bond forged in shadows and flight held firm. The courtroom, cold and impersonal, could imprison our bodies, but never the connection we had cultivated. In that sterile room, amidst judgment and law, we declared a devotion that defied logic, morality, and consequence. Our love had become our rebellion, our sanctuary, and our ultimate act of defiance in a world determined to separate us. The gavel fell, final and unforgiving. 15 years for me. Dante's sentence extended beyond the original term to account for our escape. The weight of the words pressed down like steel, a cage far heavier than any bars could ever be, as the court emptied. I felt the walls of my life closing in, the world shrinking to the narrow corridors and shadowed cells that would become my reality. Freedom, once vivid and tantalizing, now seemed a memory blurred by the harsh fluorescent lights of confinement. We were led away separately, the brief brush of our hands the only tether remaining between us. My cell was cold, impersonal, a stark reminder that all the careful planning, all the stolen nights, all the whispered confessions could not shield us from the consequences. Yet even in that sterile, oppressive silence, our connection endured, preserved in memory, in letters, in the quiet insistence that love could survive even in isolation. The first nights were the hardest. Sleep was impossible. The walls seemed to close in, and the echo of our shared past reverberated endlessly. I traced the contours of our rebellion in my mind, the precise movements that had stolen him from the world and brought him closer than any human should ever be, even stripped of freedom, even condemned to years of separation. I understood a terrifying truth. Our love was indestructible, forged in fear, obsession, and danger, and it would outlast every cell, every sentence, every moment of solitude. Letters became our lifeline. Fragile threads stretched across miles of concrete and steel. Each envelope, screened and censored, carried more than words. It carried desperation, longing, and the memory of nights when freedom had belonged to us. Dante's handwriting was meticulous, deliberate, every letter curling with the weight of unspoken fears and confessions I could feel in my chest. I traced each word with trembling fingers, imagining him reading mine in some distant, shadowed cell, our voices whispering through paper. Every letter was a ritual, a private communion in a world designed to isolate. We shared routines, dreams, regrets, small victories, and failures. We recounted the mundane and the terrifying alike, and through it, the bond that had been forged in flight and danger only deepened. Each phrase carried a double meaning, a code we had created, a language that only the two of us could understand. Paranoia still lingered even in our correspondence, fear woven into every carefully worded line, but it also sustained hope, the knowledge that we were alive, present, and endlessly devoted. Months stretched into years. The outside world moved on. Mark disappeared into his life. Strangers moved past our names, and we remained confined, yet closer than many free couples could ever be. Letters became the rhythm of existence, a pulse that kept love alive, a tether between two souls, imprisoned yet fiercely, defiantly connected, in the quiet of my cell. I realized that even behind walls and razor wire, our shared obsession, our dangerous love, had not only survived, it had thrived. The world outside changed in ways I could barely recognize. Mark moved on, remarried, building a life that no longer held space for me, while I remained trapped in corridors of steel, echoing with the memory of everything I had lost. News filtered through the letters, stories of a world continuing without us, vibrant, careless, unaware of the lives we had risked and the love we had fought to preserve. Each update was a stab of both relief and longing. Freedom was out there, but it was not ours to claim. Not yet. Inside, time slowed to a rhythm dictated by counts, locks, and the hum of fluorescent lights. Letters from Dante became a lifeline, a pulse that reminded me I was still connected to something beyond the walls. I memorized his words, reading them again and again, tracing the ink as if I could feel his hand in mine across the miles. Our love had adapted to confinement, a dangerous, obsessive force that neither guards nor cells could diminish. Even as I endured the monotony and harshness of prison life, I began to plan, quietly, for the day we would reunite. Every step we had taken, every risk we had embraced, had been in preparation for a freedom we had only imagined. The world outside might have shifted, indifferent to our sacrifice, but inside the small, silent corners of our letters and memories, our devotion remained unbroken, and I knew, with a fierce certainty, that when the day finally came, nothing could undo the bond that had been forged in fear, obsession, and the shadowed corridors of our past. The gates opened, and the world outside hit me like a rush of air I had almost forgotten existed. 12 years of confinement, letters, and whispered dreams through paper. My legs felt strange beneath me, unfamiliar in their freedom, and the sunlight was sharper, almost aggressive, as if the world itself were testing me. Every step was surreal, every breath a reminder that I had survived, that I was finally on the other side. Dante was waiting, his figure tense yet unmistakably familiar. When our eyes met, the weight of a decade melted in a heartbeat. No words could capture the tumult of relief, fear, and longing that surged through me. All the planning, all the stolen nights, all the sacrifices had led to this singular moment. We approached each other cautiously at first, as if afraid that reality might shatter the fragile thread connecting us. The world had changed while we were apart. Streets were different, faces unfamiliar, and the freedom we had once imagined in letters and dreams now demanded courage to navigate. Yet, even amidst the uncertainty, a fierce clarity remained. We were together again, and for the first time in years, the danger, the fear, and the obsession that had defined our lives no longer dictated our every move. Freedom was new, terrifying, and intoxicating, and for the first time, it was ours to share. Freedom was intoxicating, yet every step felt fragile, like walking on ice over a dark abyss. Dante and I moved cautiously through the streets of Sacramento, aware of how easily the world could tip us back into danger. We kept our identities partially concealed, habits formed in years of paranoia lingering as instinct. Each glance from a stranger, every passing car, triggered a flicker of the vigilance we had carried for so long. The city was alive, vibrant, and indifferent to our history. A stark contrast to the corridors of confinement where every detail had been scrutinized. Yet the very uncertainty of this freedom made it thrilling. We explored slowly, savoring each small decision: which street to walk, which cafe to enter, how to reclaim ordinary life without alerting the past we carried with us. Each shared smile, every quiet conversation, became an act of rebellion against the years that had tried to keep us apart. Even in this cautious freedom, the bond between us was unshakable. The letters, the whispers through paper, the secret plans, they had all built something impervious to time, distance, and danger. And now, walking side by side, the world stretched out before us as a landscape of possibilities rather than threats. For the first time, we could breathe without fear dominating every heartbeat. Yet the memory of shadows and surveillance lingered, a reminder that freedom, like love, demanded both courage and vigilance. Settling into a life together was both exhilarating and terrifying. Sacramento became our canvas, a place where we could sketch the outlines of a world that belonged to us alone. Every apartment we visited, every street we walked, was infused with the cautious optimism of people who had known only fear for so long. Small routines, a morning coffee, a walk in the park, felt revolutionary. ordinary gestures loaded with the weight of survival and longing. We built trust gradually, acknowledging that the shadows of the past would never fully disappear. The lessons learned in motels, on highways, and in letter exchanges informed every decision. We cultivated privacy with care, aware that scrutiny might still be lurking, even in a city that had no knowledge of our story. Yet with every shared meal, every quiet night at home, we discovered the fragile joy of normalcy, the first true breaths of a life once imagined in fleeting dreams. Love, forged in danger and obsession, now had space to breathe and grow. Our bond, once intertwined with paranoia and survival, evolved into a partnership grounded in patience, understanding, and the quiet certainty that we had survived the impossible together. The past remained a shadow, but it no longer controlled us. For the first time, the world felt navigable, and we could move forward, scarred, cautious, but together, building a life that, despite everything, was fully, undeniably ours. In the quiet evenings, when the city hum softened into distant murmurs, I found myself reflecting on the price we had paid. Years of freedom stolen, reputations destroyed, lives upended, all for a love that society would never condone. The weight of our choices pressed on me, heavy yet strangely affirming. Every risk, every stolen night, every defiance of the law had been a gamble we had chosen willingly. A dangerous bet on something intangible, but infinitely valuable. Dante and I would sit together, hands intertwined, tracing the invisible lines that connected past and present. We spoke of the decades we had lost, the mundane lives that had passed us by, the milestones we would never reclaim. Yet even in our reflections, a fierce pride emerged. We had endured more than most could imagine, and in the crucible of fear, obsession, and confinement, we had forged a bond unbreakable by walls, guards, or years apart. I realized then that sacrifice had not merely cost us, it had defined us. Every hardship, every moment of terror, every calculated step in our fugitive existence had shaped the people we had become. The freedom we now enjoyed was sweeter precisely because we had earned it through blood, fear, and devotion, and though the world might judge, might whisper of our sins and transgressions, we understood the truth. Love, when tested in the shadow of darkness, could emerge indestructible, terrifying, and profoundly beautiful. Love had always been our gamble, the ultimate high-stakes bet where the currency was everything we owned, our freedom, our careers, our very identities. From the first stolen glance in Block C to the secret phone, the meticulously forged records, and the night of our escape, every step had been a wager against a world determined to see us fail. The thrill of survival had been inseparable from the terror of capture, each moment balanced on the edge of disaster. I thought about the roads we traveled, the motels that became cages of paranoia, the letters exchanged through bars, and the relentless FBI pursuit that could have ended us at any turn. Each risk had been a deliberate choice, each act of rebellion a dangerous statement of devotion. Yet even in the shadow of danger, our love had grown, fierce and uncompromising, tempered in the crucible of fear and obsession. Now, years later, we could look back and recognize the price we had paid. Solitude, incarceration, reputations burned to ashes. And yet, paradoxically, the gamble had yielded the greatest prize, a life together, scarred but authentic, bound by a love that could not be measured or contained. The stakes had been unimaginably high, But we had played the hand fully, and in the reckless, terrifying, beautiful calculus of our choices, we had finally won. At last, freedom was no longer fragile, no longer tainted by the constant hum of fear or the weight of confinement. Dante and I stood together in Sacramento, scarred by the past, but unbroken, able at last to move through the world on our own terms. The streets, the cafes, even the simplest errands carried a thrill we had never imagined possible. A proof that survival was more than endurance, it was reclamation. We had been hunted, trapped, and tested by every force imaginable. Yet here we were, together, alive, and in control of our own narrative. Every touch, every shared glance was a quiet celebration of resilience, of love forged in the shadows of obsession and danger. The years of letters, whispered fears, and desperate planning had not only preserved us, they had transformed us, refining our bond into something indestructible. As we settled into a life that was entirely ours, the past became a shadow that no longer dictated our movements. We could laugh without caution, sleep without fear, love without restraint. True freedom was not merely the absence of bars or pursuit. It was the presence of choice, the power to define our lives without the world intruding. And for the first time in decades, I realized that the gamble, the sacrifice, and the obsession had yielded a rare, terrifying, and exhilarating prize, a life lived fully, together, without regrets.